Welcome back, Equity Warriors. Thanks for tuning in to another episode focused on the intersection of education and politics here on the 3E podcast. My guest today is Dr. Paul Miller. He holds an EDD in executive leadership and has spent over 20 years in urban public education, specializing in school redesign, reform, and DEI. He doubled the graduation rates for Black males at Green Tech Charter School in New York to 95%. His work encompasses 3 books, the most recent of which is We Need to Do Better 2.0, Teacher's Guide, focusing on an action-based approach to enhance urban community children's quality of life. Recently, Dr. Miller was honored with the President's Lifetime Achievement Award by the United States President and the CBC African and Caribbean International Leadership Conference. Welcome to the show, Dr. Miller.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here, Dr. Berry.
All right. It is great to have you. I don't think either of us needs to review or give a review or reiterate the horrific outcomes that have become an unfortunate norm for learners of color, but particularly Black learners here in America's public schools. It's the primary reason I have this podcast. So I want to just dive right into your work in DEI and school reform. So right now in this country, I hate to say we're living in perilous times, but it's really pretty bad when it comes to DEI. And in particular, the education of children of color, Black children and brown children here in the U.S. So in your work, you have championed DEI in school redesign and reform. So how do you manage to navigate the political challenges that come up when you're advocating for DEI for your student population?
Political challenge for DEI, I think a lot of the political challenges are usually from the larger entities or even the districts, and are not being interested. And they're interested, but only interested in a certain way. And I think some of the political challenges also come about by, who they have doing the work and how they have them doing the work. And then I think it also comes about when they are and just working with some of the larger systems. So one of the ways I navigate it is by immersing and working with charter schools more. So not to say that charter schools are the only way, because I am not pro-charter or pro-public, I'm pro-good school, right? Mm-hmm. So I just want to see kids win and kids succeed. But often when working with charter schools, you don't have to go through all the politics and the red tape. And so that's one way of navigating and still getting the work done and still working with leaders directly to implement. I just spent a whole day with the school yesterday where we did a whole day on DEI. We did workshops on We Need to Do Better 2.0. We did workshops on white privilege. Thank you. We did white privilege. We did on teaching the urban children, and just really people unearthing their biases to bring them up and out and wash them away so that they can be better for kids and build better relationships. So, it's just eliminating the middleman often with the politics. I always say I'm not a politician. So I'm not running for nobody's office. I'm not running for office. And so I could care less about the politics. Let's get the work done. So find ways to eliminate it.
All right. Well, that's one way around is just get rid of it. What about policies? Specific policies that helped you more than that number, double that graduation rate for Black males at Green Tech Charter. How did you make that happen?
So that is, from research and practice, right? So research and practice and years of working on trial and error. So I've been able to develop systems that work specifically for Black and brown kids. But when you look at a lot of John Hattie's work, so John Hattie, he does meta-analysis of meta-analysis. And so he basically studies. And so one of the things that he found that moves the needle more than anything else is building CTE, collective teacher efficacy. Mm-hmm. So taking a lens of that and trying to do everything that you do from collective teacher efficacy approach is like an overarching foundation, right? But that's not the only way, because I built also off of research 4 areas that I would call foundational pillars. And so the first one is, pillar 1 is building relationships. So, and then what I do is I work with schools to build systems and things that are purposeful to build relationships. So whether it's certain advisory programs, it's the way you build culture, the way you implement or integrate DEI and cultural competence and cultural relevancy. It's all about building relationships and building connections, but building relationships between students and staff, staff and community, staff and leadership, leadership and students, you name it. Any way you can triangulate building a relationship, that's what we work on, and we build systems that are purposeful so they're built in. Part two is the teaching and learning. So there has to be good teaching and learning. So there has to be systems built with teaching and learning. You have to make sure that teachers all know how to teach, and they know what to teach, and they know when to teach it, and they also know that they become good at delivering it and for student engagement and all the other pieces. So we put pieces in place to make sure that that happens. And the third piece is, how do we use data to inform instructional decisions? So that's, what data do you need to look at, and what data is going to give you the best or the most results? How are you going to look at this, and then how are you going to use it to inform your instructional decisions and make it relevant? Make it, and a lot of people talk about it, but they're for a lack of being, my vernacular, being appropriate, but they don't be about it, right? So a lot of people talk about it, but they don't be about it. So, and then the fourth piece is accountability. So how do we hold everybody accountable? And being able to look at yourself as the leaders and everyone else, from leaders to staff, to parents, to community, and how do we hold everybody accountable, and what do we need to put in place to make sure that this happens? And then it's about training people how to utilize these systems and making sure that they're successful. But I can guarantee you that it works. I guarantee you that you will always get results if you put these pieces in place and you work towards achieving them.
Right. I think the challenge for some leaders and listeners might be that there are things, you and I know, that always seem to get in the way when we're trying to do good things for kids. And unfortunately, many of those things they sort of fall into that, I hate to call it that political realm, but it's power and it's strength and who has authority and who does not. But getting to those, and again, I'm going to keep putting it up here. This is the book. We're going to make sure that folks have that information in order to purchase your book and read about that. I love this. Let's talk about charter schools just a little bit and your perspective on how they can approach education perhaps a little bit differently because of the flexibility they have, particularly for Black learners. And then we have the larger school systems. What can our larger school systems and the leaders in them learn from successful charters like Green Tech in order to enhance urban public education for all children in those other districts? And as well, I always try to keep in mind my listeners with similar populations, children of color or BIPOC populations in Europe and Australia.
Right. So I think what the traditional public schools can do is understand that charter schools were designed to be a think tank. So initially, when they were formulated, the hope is that they were going to be think tanks that were going to develop some great and phenomenal ideas that could later be utilized on a larger scale within school districts. And so what ended up happening is that politics and money got in the way. And so politics and money got in the way, and the district said, instead of you being my ally and advocate and friend, and let's work together, and competition breeds excellence, you and I could go play a tennis match today, right? And we're going to compete against each other, and I'm going to want to win, you're going to want to win, but we could have this conversation afterwards, right? We can still be colleagues and friends afterwards. So the traditional public schools, due to often politics and money, and they're taking our students, they're taking our teachers, they're taking our money, rather than it being a choice and an option, have now decided in too many times that they aren't interested in using charter schools as a think tank. Everything about charter schools is negative. Really the big thing is being open to collaboration, being open to partnership, being open to working together, and using competition to breed excellence. How can we be competitive friends? How can we be competitive colleagues that push each other to be better, because we're all servicing the same kids?
Yeah. If we do the things we learned in kindergarten, listen, share, be nice to one another.
And that's what it is. It has to do completely with that sharing, collaboration, and time. Like, why be angry and why, try to bash or try to hurt one another when we could collaborate and work together to support a child?
Yeah. So, taking it to a larger picture, let's look at state and federal government. Education is local, and unfortunately, my opinion. Sometimes it's so local we don't recognize that our children will not always live in the community that they're in forever. And so we fail to prepare them for that larger world and a global economy that they're going to enter when they get out of school. So what role do you think that federal and state government should play in making sure that all children have academic or educational equity and high quality instruction? Our children, all children, but particularly children of color and those who have various language backgrounds.
Right. And I think there's an old saying, Dr. Berry, that is, if you want to figure out what somebody values, follow the checkbook, right? Right. Follow their checkbook or look where the something to that extent, right? If you see where the money's going. And so when I say that is that what the numbers and research show is that traditionally, now most charter schools are public. There's not too many private charters out there, especially in New York State. There are in some states, but most of the ones that are successful and doing what they're supposed to be doing are public, right? And not to say that there aren't private ones that aren't. I believe the accountability of the public system is still there. So I say all this because the majority of kids who are in the public charter schools are Black and brown kids. And they're servicing Black and brown kids who who are usually from low income, because the charter schools are erected in low income areas. And where I'm going with all of this is that if they're servicing Black and brown kids, like in the city that I live in Rochester, New York, out of about 30,000 kids, the charter schools are servicing about 9,000 kids, right? Yeah. So we're servicing about 9,000 kids, but there's not equitable funding. So when you say a federal and state level, and so if we're saying that there are schools out there that are public, that are servicing Black and brown kids and of large populations, but the funding is not equitable because the charter schools were built on another thing that is, and whoever made this up is just stupid. But whoever said this, just ignorant, they said, well, charter schools can do more with less. And so that's what happened. So in New York State, charter schools get 2/3 of what the funding that the traditional public schools get. Now, in the city that I live in, due to there being errors with the formula, it's about 55% of what that district gets. So where the district is getting, due to having issues and some other things, based on their $1 billion budget, they are getting about $45,000 a kid. The charter school is getting $14,400 per kid. And no facilities aid, no tax levy, no anything else. And so the money should follow the child, first of all. And 100% of it should follow the child because that child deserves to get the same quality education that their counterparts get. Now, I'm not preaching that charter school is the only answer. There should be funding. And again, federal and also state should always look to increase education because it's the greatest equalizer. It is the most opportunity. That's where everybody who is a politician currently had to go through school. Everybody who's an athlete or who is an entertainer had to go through school. So it is the place where teachers have the ability to affect and touch every individual within this world and in this country at some point in time. And it's the also place that especially politicians first look to cut. And now you're not equally funding it so that kids often who are Black and brown kids who from low income areas who get a choice don't get funded the same way that their traditional public school gets right down the road. And it doesn't make any sense. Be in the same neighborhood. You can be my next door neighbor and you go to a traditional public school and I go to the charter school down the street, but I only get for my education, I only get 2/3 or 55% of what you get.
Yeah. You have to wonder. I'm wondering, well, first you said, the saying you were trying to pull out at the beginning. Yeah. And it reminded me, there is an African saying of Kesarian Kara, how are the children? The Maasai warriors use that. That's their greeting for one another, right? How are the children? Because their belief is that the state of the children tells you about the state of the country or the community as a whole. And so when we look at our schools, if this is the state of our children, this is what you believe our children are worth, that as a society, we're pretty messed up, right? You believe that these children are only worth investing 50% of what you do in other children. That just leapt out at me as you were speaking. So Black and brown communities and the inequity there, we know that there are negative cycles within Black and brown urban, a lot of people want to use the term urban communities, but Black and brown communities and low income communities. And that's where our charter schools have centered. Any barriers that you've really had to overcome to make things work in there, doing more with less, which, they expect us to do. What do you have there?
Right. So working with barriers, and a lot of the barriers, instead of making them barriers, you turn your setbacks into setups, right? And so you become a part of the community. So if you are running and operating a school in a low-income community, how do you become a part of that community? How do you bring the community into it? How do you become a hub that is something that someone might be afraid of or might have been a barrier, now it becomes into an asset? So when I was there for 11 years, part of what I tried to do was make the school the star of the community. So it was said where even a kindergartner, I had 6th to 8th grade, and we opened a middle school. I opened a middle school later on. However, a kindergartner often would say, when I get into high school, I want to go to Green. And why? Not just because they know about the academics, but it was because we built a conglomerate within the community. And so it's about giving back. It's about support. It's about bringing community people into the fold. It's about doing events with the community. It's about showing up and showing out for the community. It's about opening your doors. It's about building things in your school that will help enhance the community. So, for example, like I built a construction tech lab where we also open it up to parents and where they could get certified in construction trades. And they could go off and make $35 an hour if they took advantage of it. We created a barbershop where students were getting their apprentice license. We also had a music production studio. We had a game design lab where they were learning coding, cybersecurity that was happening. Other pieces were happening, and then open it up to community and parents, and also open it up so kids could learn these skills so they could be better community members. We had to do 100 hours of community service to graduate from them. So it's building community in everything that you do, but being a part of the community. We did actually regular events for the community and made the community a part of it. We partnered with businesses. We partnered with Divine Nine organizations. We partnered with, anyone who could, so that, one of my things is that there was no way that if we ever had academic struggles, which we didn't, but we always had academic struggles, but at the end we had great results, right? Which we didn't have poor results. If we ever had poor results, that there was no way that the governing bodies would be able to shut us down because the community would stand up. The community would fight for us because we're a part of them. And so it's about turning that, what you would say was a limitation, now into an asset.
That is awesome. You have a really good list that you just offered there. So I'm going to hope that listeners, if they need to, pause, back up, and jot those things down. Let's talk about one of your books, Cyberbullying, Breaking the Cycle of Conflict. Tell us about the book.
Right. So it was during my dissertation. And so I turned my dissertation into a book. And so I was initially experiencing a lot of conflict when I was running a school in Rochester, New York. And Rochester, just to give context, is the third poorest city in the country, highest murder rates per capita in New York State. The graduation rates, not the graduation rates, but however, the traditional public school is 646 out of 646 in New York State. The last time they published rates for graduation for Black males, it was 9%. So that was the SHOP report in 2012 was 9%. So 91% of Black males did not graduate that year. So it's a difficult place. So I was running a school and we were on the persistently dangerous list. However, we were able to get off. I was able to do some.
Wait a minute. Persistently dangerous list?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
What is that?
Okay. So there's these lists out there when there's high level of violent incidences or high level of incidents in a school that you make a national list that is federal, as the federal and state as the persistently dangerous list. And if you're on that list for too long, you're probably not going to remain open the way that you are. And so I was able to get us off that list and we were able to do things to turn it around. And I'm painting context of why I started to do the work, because I was seeing that a lot of the drama and things that were happening were between my young Black females. And so there was always some female drama. There's always something happen. And, in my lay mind, I was saying, oh, it's always starting from online and it's always coming from online. And so I was sitting down with my dissertation chair and she said to me, I think that's your topic. I think because you don't really have an answer for that. So you need to research it. You need to figure it out. And what I ended up doing the research and what I ended up figuring out, what I thought was going to happen and what I ended up figuring out wasn't really what happened. And so it really wasn't. I really thought that the girls, like it was, I don't know what I thought. I was like simpleton with it. It was really like, okay, so we're online, we got beef, and so we're going to bring it in, now let's fight, right? So what I really found out, and so with this, I was one of the first the researchers nationally that have looked at cyberbullying from a Black female's perspective. Most people look at cyberbullying, it was a white female's issue from the ages of 13 to 24. So all the research was around white females from that age until I came with my study. And so I studied Black females' experience with cyberbullying in urban environment and was able to look at it from a different perspective. And what I really saw was that the young females really don't want to fight. So really what they were doing was to not fight. And so I'm like, what does that mean, right? Because I was thinking like, oh, it's all turning into these fights and these altercations. But what the research showed me is that there was a cycle of conflict that developed, which is in the book. And the cycle of conflict can be used by administrators, by counselors, by schools, colleges, whomever. And it talks about an urban cycle of conflict. And typically what ends up happening is that there is some type of challenge. So, Dr. Berry, I don't like you because you got on yellow today, right? And yellow is not my color. Well, I actually like yellow, so I love purple and gold. But so, because I don't like you have on yellow, right? And so we go back and forth. Now, because we're in an urban environment, there's rules to this. And because there's theories called Code of the Streets by Elijah Anderson, right? And so the whole Code of the Streets is survival of the fittest. And if I let you disrespect me and I lose my respect, I also lose my safety in an urban environment. And so if you come at me and you get the best of me and you're funnier than I am, so now I have to do something else to now one up you because I can't look bad in front of everybody because if I do, they're always going to pick on me. I'm always going to be bullied, right? So now guess what? You have to see me, Dr. Berry, we got to fight. So now we're going to have to fight. But guess what? I really don't want to fight, Dr. Berry. That's what the girls said. That's what the research says. I don't really want to fight. But guess what? I don't want to be picked on either. I don't want to be bullied. I don't want to lose my safety. And so I'm going to challenge you and I'm going to challenge you to fight. But guess what? Most of the time, I'm going to make sure it's public because I want there to be somebody there to break it up before we really go at it. But if we all look like we're about to get it in and you think I'm tough, nobody's going to really bother me. So it's all about trying to survive. So for adults, it's how do you intervene? When do you intervene? And how do you become the catalyst that takes some of the pressure off the kids? And where do you insert yourself to be able to help them do things differently and challenge that process differently? And so a lot of it turned out to be, how do I support these young Black women differently to take some of the pressure off of them so that they don't have to fight? Because then when it comes down to it, they will, or they do, because they're put in a situation where it may happen. But that's not really what they wanted. They really wanted a resolution. And then it's also teaching certain conflict resolution skills. And how do you help them to manage it and change the way that they're looking at it and do it differently? And then handle the whole, online piece a little bit differently. But that's the gist of what has came out of that research.
So you gave me a little flashback, I suppose, to probably fourth grade when I stepped on a girl's pants bottom accidentally on the playground, and she was wearing some new white pantsuit, and she immediately, she had to square off and challenge me for a fight. And I'm like, but, back then you challenged, everybody met after school in a designated place. And I think I didn't want to fight. But like you said, there was this code. If I didn't fight, I'd be picked on forever. Yeah, I don't think much has changed in the number of years since I've been in elementary and middle school. I think still the same. And I really think maybe you need a 2.0 on that one, and it's for adults who cyberbully still. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of this, right? There's a lot of the cyberbullying online, and adults have became, because what happens is that people can formulate whatever identity they want behind the screen. And
Yeah.
so I feel safe to be who I think I want to be, or say whatever is going to get me likes or get me looked at. And so I can do things that I won't do in person. And so that's what's happening, is you're pretending. You're being somebody that you're not often when you're acting that way behind the screen.
Yeah. So bullying, though, cyberbullying, bullying in person, all of that. Do you think there are enough resources? Is it a priority, or is there more that should be happening in schools right now?
I think a good school always makes school safety a priority. And so the first thing that I learned when I became an administrator within schools was that before learning can take place, the school has to be safe, right? And so if bullying is happening, which I'm sure it happens in every school in America, that it is the administration's job, school leadership's job, to make sure that the environment is safe. And so that means having policies and procedures for when it happens. It means also how you're dealing with it, how you deal with conflict management, how you deal with conflict resolution, how you are able to build processes and systems to make it normal to ask for help and support, and make it okay, and make it safe for people. So do I think that that's happening? I don't think a lot of schools handle it well. I think there's some who do, and I think there's some who write a good policy, but a lot who aren't doing the work that needs to happen. And I think that's why a lot of schools are failing, because there's a lot of that happen everywhere. You write it, you say it, but you're not doing it. Or you don't know what to do, but won't ask for help. Education is crazy, because I find so many people are not willing to ask for help or say they don't know, or what I'm doing isn't working, because they're scared to lose their jobs, or they're scared to tell somebody, like, no, I need a mentor. I need help. Like, I need support, because you know what you know. Like, when I first got to where I was at, I had got a mentor, and that mentor helped me tremendously, because I knew what I knew, and I brought a decent skill set in, but I wouldn't have been able to grow the way that I did without being willing to say, hey, I need help and support.
Yeah. And that's something that my opinion, that I think that we as people of color, as Black people, because we have for so long been pitted against one another, instead of reaching out, reaching back and saying, hey, I've already been through this, let me help you. That is something. And so that sort of ties into your second book that I want to talk about for a second. We need to do better. We do need to do better as a people, but your book, We Need to Do Better, is about changing the mindset of children through family, community, and education. So when I talk politics on the show, I remind folks that their school boards, those boards of education, those are political entities. They are governed, they are elected officials. They are the ones who create policy. And so when we talk about policy creation, that's who we should be looking to. So as you think about, family, community, and education, how can those political leaders, your school board trustees, create policies that support collaboration between family, community, and education? Because we have to have all three of those working together to uplift marginalized communities. What should they be looking at and doing?
That's a loaded question.
I know.
I'm going to start with saying, so I do a couple podcasts as well. So one is From the Gutter to Greatness. The other one is Moving the Needle. And it's a show that's on one of the radio stations in New York here, WDKX. And so our whole episode yesterday was about school boards. And so we brought a school board member in from the traditional RCSD public school district. Now, he is not the most popular person on this board, because he is the one who speaks up and tries to advocate and fight against some of their quid pro quo deals, some of their behind the scenes shenanigans and foolishness. And he wants change. But I live in a city where people don't really want change. They like to be status quo and like to be complacent. And I say all that is because, we could talk about what they need to implement and what policies, procedures, and those things. But we need to first maybe talk about how their people are getting even elected. All right. And so these elected officials are getting put in usually as popularity contests. And they're not people who have a background in understanding education. And so when I look at even the school board, I think there's 2 certified teachers on the school board right now, and where I'm at, that's been failing for years. The school board member talked about that they didn't even know what a SMART goal was until a month ago. So, and they have $1 billion budget, Dr. Berry. So he also talked about that it's so crazy to me that there's these people. And so they, instead of governing, so a board's job is supposed to be to govern, basically govern and manage that whoever is in charge is doing the things they say they're going to do, and that they're doing it effectively and efficiently, and that they're doing it to fidelity. And if they're not, then how do we dress it? How do we help? How do we support? How do we remove, right? That's what I think a board's job is. However, the boards in too many situations are operating, and they're not qualified to operate. So we got people who aren't qualified to operate putting in policies and procedures that they don't even know what it means. He shared with me yesterday that until recently, the board member who's been on the board for 10 years didn't know what an IEP was.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm telling you. So you are governing for a district that has $1 billion budget, and at its heyday had 35 to almost 40,000 kids. You don't know what an IEP is?
Now, I might understand that if it's your first year on the board, but 10 years?
And that's what I mean. And so, we could talk about implementing it, but the communities out here have to do a better job of educating and voting. And then if you're going to be a board member, like there was even somebody recently running for a board member, and they were running on the platform of they want to do mental health, which is cool. But what about student outcomes? What about how do you want to help govern and make sure that students get outcomes, especially when it's reported that you're the lowest performing school district in the state and one in the country? But you want to talk about mental health. I get mental health is important. And I get that, if you're mentally strong, you can do better and all that. So I'm not knocking mental health. Mental health is super important. But nowhere in your platform are you talking about student outcomes, and that's knowing how to get there. So the first thing is our board people have to be educated. And then if they're not, they need to be trained on what student outcomes look like and how do you help govern. And then when your leadership isn't producing, how do you help support them, or how do you help find someone else that will? Yeah.
A few episodes, I want to say it's probably 5 or 6 back from you, this episode, I had a guest, Deborah Keys-Wright, who does governance training with school boards. And so people who want to know more about that ought to look back to, I want to say it's episode 58, and check out that conversation with Deborah. I think I said it before, the first time we met, we could talk for hours, and that's a little dangerous. So my one last question for you is, I paraphrase Dr. Angela Davis, who said, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. So I want you to give our listeners the one thing you cannot accept, and then what they can do to help support that change.
I can't accept failure. I can't accept kids dying in failure because they're not educated. What can you do differently? I mean, even if just out of this conversation, if you voted differently, if you with an educated lens, if you chose to participate in the vote where you might have sat home and did nothing, or you're voting for your cousin because he's running for school board, but your cousin don't know anything about schools, changing some of that. Also, be willing to, again, fight against the systems and stop going with what's convenient and what's easy, and be willing to accept change, especially when change is about growth and change is about, development. Change can be positive. Change doesn't have to be negative. It just means that something's not going as planned and something different needs to happen to get the desired outcomes, and trying to make sure that people understand that that's okay. That's okay to get involved. It's okay to do that. And then for our school people, get help, get support. If you've been doing the same thing over and over again and you're not getting results, that's the definition of insanity. Do something different. Get help. Get support. Be okay with saying, I don't know. And you know what? It doesn't make you look bad. It doesn't make you weak. It just makes you, when it makes you someone who really cares.
Yeah. And a lifetime learner, because you're willing to say, I don't know. Somebody help, teach me so I can do better. Thank you. My guest today has been Dr. Paul Miller. I'm going to make sure his contact information is down in the notes, along with information about the 3 books he's written. Dr. Miller, thank you for joining me. It has been insightful thought-provoking. Equity Warriors, if you want to do something about student outcomes, if you want to make your schools better, I say it every episode, get involved, stay involved. Vote like your life depended on it, because our children's lives do. Vote in your local elections, school board, mayor, city council. Go to a school board meeting. Again, they are almost always entertaining and very informative. And then advocate through whatever channels you can. If it's social media, follow me across my channels, post, repost, like, share, all those things we learned to do in kindergarten. Follow Dr. Miller. His contact information is down there as well. And then continue to join me every week. Connect with me on social using the links in the notes. Send your questions, topics, and requests to info@askdrberry.com, and I'll answer those questions and bring you more experts to help address those topics. Don't worry about the things you cannot change. Change the things you can no longer accept. And I'll see you next time.